Do you know the foods your ancestors ate? Do you eat those foods today? In Native American communities across the country, there's a growing movement to ensure more people have access to traditional foods. Now, here in the Southwest, that might mean beans, corn, squash, and chefs are also playing an important role in the efforts to help people access traditional foods to improve their health. Antonio Gonzalez sits down this week with a chef from the Navajo Nation who is sharing his knowledge widely from restaurants to community groups.
Chef Brian Yazzie, thank you for stopping by New Mexico PBS.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about what your favorite traditional food is.
I like, there's two ingredients I like. I like corn and squash, and especially corn because how it originated and traveled up north from Mexico into North America, into Canada, and the story behind that and how each tribal community have their own variety and the story behind a variety they have. So to me, corn is one of the most sacred ingredient to me. And the next to that is squash.
And why are traditional foods important to you?
They are important because they hold a sacred meaning and they hold a historical truth about who we are and where we come from. It talks about a time and place of who we are and the original being of North America and with the ingredients that we have used before contact and how these ingredients originated and how they travel and how they have stories with trade routes coming from Cahokia in St. Louis and Chaco Canyon here in New Mexico and down into Arizona, down to Mexico, and how these ingredients have traveled so far and they have these stories that come with it. And for me, growing up, I always had a passion for cooking, but I always wondered where do these ingredients come from? As sweet corn has been commercialized, and I just thought growing up corn was the main staple of indigenous people. You know, and then into my teen years, I learned that there's other ingredients that are here as well, and which is now known as American cuisine in a way.
And you cook professionally. Tell us what drew you into this career.
Yeah, I started cooking at the age of 7, and my mom would be my inspiration growing up as a single parent with 7 siblings. So she was always in the kitchen after work or even before work. And at the age of 7, I put myself in a position to where I'm old enough to help. I'm curious of what that smell is coming from the kitchen or what these ingredients are and how they are processed and how they're cooked. So from setting up the dining table to mixing the soup or tossing the salad or the ingredients within the salad, chopping up veg. So to me, that was my starting point as becoming a cook and then a chef. And my mom would be my main inspiration.
And you are starting to work with some other indigenous chefs, including Sean Sherman, who's known as the sous chef. What have you learned from working with other indigenous cooks?
Yeah, I started working with Sean back in 2014 while I was in culinary school. And my girlfriend and I, back in 2014, there was no Native American club on campus, so at St. Paul College. So we brainstormed and we came up with a club name and strategized about how we can bring the Native population on campus and bring awareness of our heritage within Minnesota as well. So in 2014 of October, we had our first event and a cultural event, and we were looking for a Native caterer. And I found Sean Sherman on social media. I invited him over, and he had appetizers on the table, and just everyone loved it. And to me, that was an eye opener. And ever since then, I started working with him, and that was in 2014 when I just started learning the fundamentals of cooking and professionally, and not just as a home cook. And when I connected with him, and he introduced me to these other indigenous chefs, like Chef Neftali, Carlos Baca, or Claudio Serrera. So these chefs who have been working for years, not only in the kitchen, but also as an activist and just bringing forth and revitalizing our indigenous food. So connecting with them and learning from them, and that was my inspiration and my motivation. And there's a lot of upcoming Native cooks and chefs, who are starting to look up to me as well. And to me, that's still inspirational for me to keep moving forward and to keep breaking barriers.
And you had mentioned the term activist. Do you see yourself as a food activist, especially in Native communities?
I just see myself as a servant. I would say I'm a servant of the people, to where I'm giving back the knowledge and the skill that I was taught, that I picked up, and giving that back and showing up and coming cooks and chefs, and also the next generation, kids who are at home watching TV, or who are at home watching their parents and siblings cook. So I feel like I'm a servant of our people, and I don't really identify myself as an activist. In a way, that's what I'm known as, but I really don't like to use that word.
And so now with your cooking and traveling across the country in Native and non-Native communities, what do you hope people experience after they take part in eating some of the indigenous foods that you prepare in meals?
Yeah, I hope that people take away from the experience is learning and identifying these ingredients, and knowing that there's people here that are revitalizing our indigenous food, and just gaining that knowledge that what real North American cuisine is, and what actually was here before contact, and what are still being used, and what can be grown, and what can be harvested, and what can be brought back to life.
And what are you hearing from people in communities? You mentioned contact, and we know how it's changed the way of life for tribes across the country, including in what we consume, what we eat. So what are you hearing from people about traditional Native foods?
There's a thin line between that. There's some negativity and positivity, but it just depends. It depends on how you carry yourself. And to me, I'm a humble person, but when it comes to it, there's some stuff that I would have to talk about and bring forth and ways to break a barrier. And there's some elders who I have talked with about in different communities who do not eat certain type of food, and for example, I did an event in Portland last year with Chef Carlos Baca and Rowan White, and we connected with the community there, with the food growers and the producers, and we reached out locally and received ingredients that they had. And also with Rowan White, she had some ingredients that she had been growing within that year that we use. So I feel like it's all about appropriation and protocols, because every region in the U.S. have different protocols, different tribes, and for example, with Navajo, there's certain ingredients and certain animals that we're not allowed to eat, with ceremonial use and this type of stuff. So yeah, it's just about appropriation and just how you carry yourself as a chef.
And so how did you handle that when you are in a community or a group setting and you are using foods from different regions, different tribes? And for example, with the Standing Rock movement, you traveled to Standing Rock and you had an opportunity to be there and be around people from different tribes. Tell us a little bit about how your approach was there.
Yeah, when you show up, you do an orientation, about 1 or 2 days orientation in general, about just learning the protocols and the rules about the camp, and the emergency status of it as well. So beyond that, taking the orientation as a cook, my main focus was not on the front line, but in the kitchen and cooking these indigenous food that are brought to us from the neighboring communities and from the tribes in the area, and using that with my skill and the knowledge that I carry, I use that in a way to feed those who are on the front line while they're fighting for our indigenous rights. And also sharing those stories on social media brought awareness as well, because not only does the pipeline affect the tribe within the area or the people downstream, but it also affects our animal relatives and our plant relatives that are downstream as well.
there's some folks who may be tuning in who may be intimidated a little bit by cooking, or even, preparation of being overwhelmed with a recipe or something like that. Yeah. What's your advice to those people?
Within the last 4 or 5 years, there has been food sovereignty projects and conferences, workshops that have been popping up across North America and into Canada. And I would highly recommend for people to attend these conferences, these workshops, and learn about how to process hominy, how to make turn corn into flour, and how to make tortilla, and how to butcher a whole deer, a venison, even a bison as well. Attending these workshops and learning where the food comes from, and learning how to grow the food, how to harvest, and eating with the season. And so there's a lot more than just being in the kitchen. As chefs and cooks, we're looked at as being in the kitchen, but we're more like teachers, because we teach about where these food come from, and what the purpose of it is in every cuts of meat. So I feel like people should reach out to these communities that have these conferences and these workshops, because they're out there. There's a lot that are coming up this year. Food sovereignty projects is a major word right now, because it's starting to be used a lot, and I think it's a good thing, because people are starting to wake up and learn about the food.
Well, thank you for joining us today.